As the morning sun rose over the coastline of Santa Barbara, California, Caitlin Hamilton gazed at the beautiful blue of the Pacific Ocean through her kitchen window. Every time she saw this view, her heart leaped with joy. For her, working from home as a freelance graphic designer, this house with its ocean view meant more than just a residence. It was the realization of a dream itself. "Mom, are the pancakes ready yet?" 6-year-old Sophie appeared in the kitchen still in her pajamas. Her blonde hair was disheveled, and she rubbed her still sleepy blue eyes while clinging to her mother's legs. "Almost ready, sweetheart," Caitlin answered, gently stroking her daughter's head. "What would you like to do today?" "I want to go to the ocean. I want to swim with my float." Sophie's eyes instantly sparkled. Since summer vacation had started, she looked forward to spending time at the beach every single day. Caitlin smiled as she flipped pancakes in the pan. It had been a year since they moved to this house. When her husband Mark's architectural firm successfully completed a major project, they were finally able to purchase the oceanfront home they had dreamed of. Their life had completely transformed from their previous apartment living inland. It was like entering an entirely different world. "Good morning, beautiful ladies." Mark came down the stairs. Her husband had just returned from his morning jog, and his t-shirt was damp with sweat. As an architect who often worked at construction sites requiring physical stamina, he never missed his daily morning exercise. "Daddy, can we go to the ocean today?" Sophie bounced excitedly as she ran to her father. "Of course. But first we need to eat breakfast," Mark answered, lifting his daughter up. "I just finished the initial phase of a new project, so today is family time." Caitlin felt relieved at her husband's words. For the past few months, Mark had been busy with the design of a new commercial facility and was often consumed with work even on weekends. It looked like they would finally be able to spend quality time together as a family of 3. While eating breakfast, they could see their neighbor tending to his garden. Richard Stevenson was one of the local residents who had been kind to them since they moved in. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton." Richard waved over the garden fence. Caitlin opened the window and returned the greeting. "Good morning, Richard. Beautiful weather today, isn't it?" "Yes, indeed. Off to the beach again today." A smile appeared on Richard's lips, but there was something unnatural about his expression. "Be careful and have fun." For a moment, Caitlin felt something odd about the tone of those words, but she quickly dismissed the thought. It was surely just a kind remark. The residents in this area were all friendly, especially warm toward families with small children. "Mom, let's hurry and get our beach stuff ready." Sophie clapped her hands excitedly. Caitlin laughed as she began clearing the dishes. Sunscreen, towels, her favorite pink float, sand toys. Taking the same items each time was Sophie's habit. That pink float in particular had become her companion at the sea ever since she received it as a birthday gift. "Let's go a little early today," Mark suggested. "Sophie can play to her heart's content when there are fewer people around." Caitlin nodded. The quiet beach before it became crowded with tourists was indeed perfect for peaceful family time. The sun was still low in the sky, and the sand wouldn't be too hot yet. When they finished preparing and stepped outside, Richard was still in his garden. He stopped his work and waved again. "Have a wonderful day." The path leading to the beach was filled with the fragrance of wild lavender and sea breeze. Sophie walked bouncing between her parents, occasionally stopping to pick small flowers. Watching her daughter's innocent behavior, Caitlin wished this moment could last forever. "Look, Mom. I can see the ocean." At the bottom of the hill, the blue horizon of the Pacific Ocean spread out before them. Thanks to the timing of just after 8 in the morning, there were hardly any people on the beach yet. Only a few early morning joggers and local residents walking their dogs could be seen. "We practically have it to ourselves today," Mark said with satisfaction. They spread their beach mat in their usual spot, a quiet area a little away from the lifeguard tower. Caitlin took sunscreen from her bag and began carefully applying it to Sophie's skin. "Mom, it's cold." Sophie squirmed ticklishly. "Be patient. We have to protect your skin," Caitlin gently persuaded as she spread sunscreen on her daughter's small shoulders and arms. California's sun was beautiful, but care was needed for a child's sensitive skin. Mark took out the pink float and began inflating it with an air pump. This float was a special gift from Sophie's grandmother for her 5th birthday. It was shaped like an adorable unicorn, and Sophie had named it Luna and treasured it. "Luna wants to swim in the ocean today too," Sophie said, hugging the float. "I'm sure she does. But let's start with some sand play first," Caitlin said, taking out a bucket and shovel for sand play. Sophie sat down on the sand and began enthusiastically building a sandcastle. With her small hands, she scooped sand and carefully packed it into the bucket. Her serious expression looked exactly like a little architect. "Can I build as well as Daddy?" Sophie looked up at her father. "You absolutely can." Mark sat down next to his daughter and began digging in the sand too. The foundation of architecture starts with building a solid base. Caitlin captured this heartwarming family scene with her camera. Thanks to her freelance work, she was deeply grateful to be able to spend weekday mornings like this with her family. When she worked in the city, she could only enjoy the ocean at crowded weekend beaches. As the sun gradually rose higher, more people began arriving at the beach. Young couples, families with children, groups of friends. Everyone was enjoying the morning ocean in their own way. "Mom, look." Sophie excitedly picked up a seashell. "It's beautiful." In her small palm was a white seashell with a pearl-like luster. Its surface, smoothed by the waves, sparkled beautifully in the morning sunlight. "It really is beautiful." "You found a treasure," Caitlin admired the shell with her daughter. "I'll give this to Luna as a present." Sophie carefully placed the shell next to her pink float. The three of them walked along the beach, collecting shells and pretty stones. Sophie became absorbed in creating a small collection, delighting each time she found shells of unusual shapes or colors. "What kind of animal lived in this shell?" Sophie asked, holding up a spiral shell. "It's like the ocean version of a snail," Caitlin explained. "It lived in the sea, moving around slowly." "Where is it now?" "I'm sure it found a new home and is living happily." Mark checked his watch. "It's already 9:30. It should be fine to get in the water soon." Sophie's face immediately brightened. "Yay! Time to swim with Luna." She hurried back to her pink float and carried it toward the water's edge. Caitlin applied sunscreen to her daughter's body once more, just to be safe. "The water might be cold, so let's get used to it gradually. First up to her ankles, then to her knees, and slowly to waist depth." Sophie was initially surprised by the cold water, but soon became accustomed to it and began happily splashing. "Come in too, Mom." Caitlin also entered the water and played with the waves, holding her daughter's hand. Gentle waves lapped at their feet, carrying away sand as they retreated. This natural rhythm had a healing quality that couldn't be felt in city life. From the beach mat, Mark watched over his family while sketching the seaside scenery in his work sketchbook. It was an occupational hazard of being an architect. When he saw beautiful landscapes, he couldn't help but want to analyze their structure and flow of lines. "Hey, Daddy, come here too." Sophie waved her hand. Mark put down his sketchbook and headed to the water's edge. The family of three joined hands in a circle and jumped and danced to the rhythm of the waves. Sophie's laughter echoed on the sea breeze. "Now I want to swim with Luna." Sophie pointed to her pink float. Caitlin hesitated a little. "Isn't it still a bit early? Maybe after you get more used to the water." "It's okay, Mom," Sophie answered confidently. "I've gotten really good at swimming." Indeed, with the swimming lessons that started last month, Sophie had improved dramatically. With the float it would be safe, and most importantly, the water depth was only about waist deep for adults in the shallow area. All right. But I'll stay right next to you. Sophie joyfully brought her pink float into the water. When Caitlin carefully helped her daughter sit on the float, Sophie smiled proudly. Look, Mom. I'm swimming like a little fish. Indeed, Sophie was floating on the water's surface like a little mermaid, supported by her float. Her blonde hair hung wet on her shoulders, and her blue eyes sparkled in the sunlight. Caitlin recorded this moment with her waterproof camera. Surely when she looked back at this years later, the memory of this perfect morning would come flooding back. This feels so good. Sophie dipped both hands in the water, creating small splashes. Luna is happy too. Other families swimming nearby also showed interest in Sophie's adorable float. A small girl approached with her mother. That float is so cute, the mother said to Caitlin. Thank you. It's my daughter's favorite, Caitlin replied with a smile. The children quickly became friends and began playing in the water together. Sophie introduced Luna to her new friend and showed off her shell collection. Caitlin returned to her husband's side and watched the girls play. It's wonderful how she can naturally become friends with other children like this. It is. That would be difficult in an urban setting, Mark nodded. We really made the right decision moving to this place. The sun rose even higher, and many people had gathered at the beach. But the perfect time that began in the morning stillness felt like it was still continuing. With Sophie's innocent laughter echoing around them, Caitlin felt happiness from the bottom of her heart. By past 10 in the morning, the beach was showing signs of genuine bustle. Families, young couples, and groups of friends were spreading tents and umbrellas in spots of their choosing. Sophie continued playing in the shallow water with Emily, the 7-year-old girl who had become her new friend. Mom, look. Emily and I are playing fish. Sophie sat on her pink float, using both hands to paddle through the water. Emily was swimming alongside her with a blue float. The innocent laughter of the two girls mixed with the gentle sound of the waves. Caitlin sat on the beach mat, photographing the girls' joyful activities with her waterproof camera. She never thought the photography skills she had developed through her freelance work would be useful at times like this. Each photo captured beautiful moments that seemed worthy of being published in a magazine. The water feels so good. Sophie turned around and waved to her parents. The sunlight reflected off the water's surface, making her daughter's blonde hair shine. The pink float was vibrant in color, like a large flower floating on the sea. Watching this scene gave her the illusion that time had stopped. Mark was checking blueprints sent by a client yesterday on his work tablet. Even on holidays, an architect's work never left his mind. However, listening to his daughter's joyful voice helped ease the stress of work. Daddy, come swim with us. Sophie called out. Wait a little longer. Let me just check these blueprints, Mark waved back. Jennifer, Emily's mother, was sitting next to Caitlin. She was a bright woman around 30 years old, pregnant with her second child. Sophie swims so well, Jennifer said admiringly. She started taking swimming lessons. At first she was scared, but now she loves the ocean, Caitlin answered proudly. Emily is the same way. Children have such high adaptability. The two mothers were engrossed in conversation about child rearing. Between mothers with daughters of similar ages, there was no shortage of common topics. At that moment, Sophie's expression suddenly changed. Her face, which had been laughing joyfully, suddenly stiffened. Mom. At first, it couldn't be heard over the wind. Sophie seemed unable to move on her float. Sophie. Caitlin stood up. Mom, my back hurts. Sophie's voice was trembling. The girl who had been playing so happily suddenly began to cry. It started as small sobs but gradually turned into intense crying. Sophie! Caitlin rushed into the water in panic. Mark also threw down his tablet and stood up. Emily watched her friend with a confused expression, not understanding what was happening. What's wrong? What hurts? Caitlin asked as she approached her daughter. My back, it's hot, it hurts. Sophie writhed on the float while tears streamed down her face. Caitlin quickly helped Sophie down from the float. While supporting her daughter's body and carrying her to the shallow water, Sophie was moaning softly in pain. It's okay, it's okay. Mommy's here. Laying Sophie down on the beach mat, Caitlin tried to check her daughter's back. However, she couldn't see the detailed situation through the swimsuit. Can you show me your back? Sophie nodded while crying in pain. When Caitlin slightly moved the shoulder straps of the swimsuit to look at the back, she gasped. Mark! Hurry! On Sophie's back was an obviously abnormal red rash spreading. This wasn't ordinary sunburn. The skin was inflamed, with small blisters forming in places. It looked like some kind of chemical reaction, a symptom unlike anything they had ever seen. What is this? Mark was also speechless seeing his daughter's back. Jennifer also approached with concern. We should call a doctor. This isn't normal. Caitlin's hands were shaking. That morning, she had so carefully applied sunscreen, so how could this happen? Sophie's crying was becoming increasingly intense, indicating that the pain was getting worse. Call the lifeguard. Caitlin shouted to the people around them. Several people immediately ran toward the lifeguard tower. Mark held Sophie's hand and continued speaking to her gently. It's okay, Sophie. You'll feel better soon. However, his voice also carried anxiety. This symptom was unlike anything they had ever seen before. 2 minutes later, a young lifeguard arrived with a medical kit. He immediately understood the seriousness of Sophie's condition at a glance. This could be chemical burns. We need to get her to the medical tent immediately. The lifeguard called for backup on his radio and, together with another colleague, placed Sophie on a stretcher. Caitlin and Mark hurriedly gathered their beach items and followed the stretcher. At the beach medical tent, a volunteer staff member with nursing qualifications was on standby. The female nurse in her 50s frowned upon seeing Sophie's back. I've never seen symptoms like this. This isn't ordinary sunburn or injury from marine life. The nurse washed Sophie's back with cold saline solution and gave her pain medication. However, the symptoms didn't improve. If anything, the inflammation seemed to be spreading. I'm calling an ambulance. This requires detailed examination at a hospital. Caitlin's mind was in chaos. The perfect morning had turned into a nightmare in an instant. Sophie was still crying in pain, her small body trembling with suffering. Why is this happening? Caitlin murmured. We didn't do anything different. Mark put his arm around his wife's shoulders and answered, I don't know. But she'll be okay. We'll get her the best treatment. The sound of an ambulance siren could be heard approaching. The medical staff began efficiently preparing to transfer Sophie to the ambulance. Caitlin held her daughter's hand while praying continuously in her heart. Mom, it hurts. Sophie's small voice tore at Caitlin's heart. We'll be at the hospital soon. The doctor will make you better. In the ambulance, the emergency medical technician continuously monitored Sophie's condition. Blood pressure, pulse, body temperature, everything showed abnormal values. This is clearly contact dermatitis from chemical substances, the technician reported to the hospital by radio. Chemical burns of unknown cause, 6-year-old female, conscious but in severe pain. Caitlin looked out the window. The beach where they had been enjoying themselves just moments ago looked like a different world. They had left that pink float and all the sand toys back at the tent. But none of that mattered now. Her daughter's safety was the only thing that was important. The pediatric ward of Santa Barbara General Hospital was brightly lit by the afternoon sunlight. However, this place felt like darkness to Caitlin. Sophie lay on a special treatment bed with cooling pads applied to her back. The pain medication had finally stopped her crying, but she occasionally let out small moans. The test results are in. Dr. Grayson entered the room with a serious expression, medical chart in hand. This pediatrician in his 40s was a veteran with over 20 years of experience, but this was his first case like this. Sophie's symptoms are contact dermatitis caused by chemical substances. However, this isn't ordinary chemical burns, he said. Caitlin and Mark caught their breath at the doctor's words. What do you mean? Mark asked in a trembling voice. Blood tests and skin sample analysis detected a special organic compound. This is an artificially synthesized substance that doesn't exist in nature. Dr. Grayson chose his words carefully. Meaning, it's a chemical substance that someone intentionally created. Caitlin leaned back in her chair. The meaning of the word, intentional, slowly sank into her head. Doctor, does that mean this wasn't an accident? Unfortunately, we have to consider that possibility. This substance is designed to react to water temperature and body temperature to cause skin inflammation. Moreover, it has the special property of having a several-hour time lag before effects appear. While listening to the doctor's explanation, Caitlin was thinking back to the morning's events. Sophie had been playing with her float for over an hour. At first nothing happened, but then symptoms suddenly appeared. We need to contact the police, Dr. Grayson continued. This is clearly a criminal act. That evening, Detective Davis Rodriguez from the Santa Barbara Police Department visited the hospital. First, please tell me in detail about your actions this morning, Detective Rodriguez asked, carefully taking notes. Caitlin talked through all the details she could remember, from the morning preparations to the events at the beach. She particularly explained that Sophie had been using the pink float, and that the float had been left by the front entrance the night before. Where is the float currently? We left it at the beach medical tent, Mark answered. We'll retrieve it first thing tomorrow morning and have it analyzed at the Forensic Science Laboratory, Detective Rodriguez wrote in his notebook. Until then, we'll arrange for no one to touch it. The next morning, the forensic team conducted evidence collection at the beach. As expected, special chemical substances were detected on the pink float. Even more important was the footage from the beach surveillance cameras. This is footage from around 5:40 a.m. At the police station, Detective Rodriguez pointed to a small monitor. The screen showed the silhouette of a male figure doing some kind of work in the dim early morning beach. This person appears to be applying something to a float that was placed in the area the Hamilton family always uses. The footage was unclear, but they could tell it was a middle-aged man's build. He carefully checked his surroundings while quickly finishing his work and leaving. We can't confirm his face, but from his build and way of walking, there's a high possibility he's a local resident, Detective Rodriguez continued his analysis. Someone who knows the Hamilton family's behavior patterns. Caitlin felt a chill down her spine. Does that mean this was a crime targeting us? That possibility is high. However, we still don't know the motive. Has anything unusual happened recently? Neighborhood troubles or being resented by someone work-related? Caitlin and Mark looked at each other. They couldn't think of anything in particular. In the year since they moved here, their relationship with local residents had been good. Additional report from the Forensic Science Laboratory. A young police officer entered the conference room with documents. We have detailed analysis results about the detected chemical substance. While this substance could be synthesized with high school-level chemistry knowledge, actually making it would require considerable specialized knowledge. This is probably the work of someone with chemistry education. Detective Rodriguez frowned. Someone with chemistry education. Suddenly, one name came to Caitlin's mind. Richard Stevenson. Who is that? Our neighbor. A former high school chemistry teacher. Caitlin's voice was shaking. Yesterday morning, he knew we were going to the beach and said to be careful. At that time, something felt unnatural about it. Detective Rodriguez hurriedly began searching on his computer. Richard Stevenson, former Santa Barbara High School chemistry teacher. Looking at the information displayed on the screen, the detective's expression changed. This person has a criminal record. 3 years ago, he lost a boundary line lawsuit against a neighbor and paid $200,000 in damages. That neighbor was. The detective checked the screen. Alex Chen, a Chinese-American architect. Mark leaned forward. An architect? Yes. Mr. Chen moved to Seattle for work last year. And the people who purchased that house were us. Caitlin's voice was hoarse. Detective Rodriguez stood up. The situation is becoming clear. Stevenson may have directed his resentment toward the previous neighbor at you, the new residents. But why Sophie? Why target a child? Tears welled up in Caitlin's eyes. The psychology of people with grudges is complex. Rather than direct retaliation, he may have tried to cause deeper suffering by targeting what you treasure most, your child. That afternoon, a search warrant was issued by the court. When police officers arrived at the Stevenson house, Richard was doing his usual flower tending in the garden. Mr. Richard Stevenson. This is Santa Barbara Police. We have a search warrant. Richard's face turned pale for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. This must be some mistake. I haven't done anything. However, the evidence discovered in the basement was decisive. Chemistry experiment equipment, raw materials for special compounds, and most importantly, a small bottle containing the same chemical substance detected on Sophie. Can you explain this substance? Detective Rodriguez showed the evidence. After a long silence, Richard began speaking as if he had given up. I didn't do anything wrong. I just couldn't forgive the people in that house. What crime does a 6-year-old child have? I don't know. Richard held his head. I lost a chin, lost my house and property. Seeing new residents come and live happily. I couldn't stand it. Hearing this confession at the police station, Caitlin's whole body shook. The person she had thought was a neighbor was actually a criminal who had targeted her daughter. Moreover, the reason was resentment toward the previous resident, something they had absolutely nothing to do with. Richard Stevenson was charged with assault and bail was denied. His crime shocked the local residents greatly. The fact that someone who was superficially a kind neighbor was actually a dangerous person made everyone feel afraid. 3 months later, Richard Stevenson's sentence was handed down at Santa Barbara District Court. He received a prison sentence of 8 years for assault and use of dangerous substances. In the sentencing reasons read in court, the judge particularly emphasized the phrase, despicable crime targeting a helpless child. Caitlin watched that moment from the gallery. When Richard was handcuffed and led out of the courtroom, he never looked back once. For these 3 months, she had imagined this day many times, but actually she felt emptiness rather than relief. Sophie's physical recovery went smoothly. The scars on her back became barely noticeable thanks to specialist treatment. However, the emotional wounds weren't easily healed. For a while, she was afraid of the ocean and would sometimes cry just seeing a float. Mom, why did Uncle Richard hurt me? One evening after dinner, Sophie asked Caitlin. Explaining these complex circumstances to a 6-year-old child was difficult. Uncle was sick in his heart. But it's okay now. He can never hurt you again. Caitlin gently embraced her daughter. After the incident, the local residents supported the Hamilton family in various ways. The Miller couple across the street delivered homemade meals every day, and neighborhood children frequently came to play, trying to cheer up Sophie. Particularly impressive was the behavior of Jennifer, Emily's mother whom they had met at the beach. Starting the week after the incident, she came to check on Sophie almost every day. "Real neighbors are people like this," Caitlin murmured to Mark. "That's right. People who reach out their hands when you're in trouble are the ones who create true community." About 2 months after the incident, Sophie began gradually overcoming her fear of the ocean. At first she just walked on the beach, but gradually she was able to approach the water's edge. One Sunday morning, Sophie suddenly said, "Mom, I want to go to the ocean again." Caitlin was surprised. "Really? Aren't you scared?" "No. But this time, I want to go with everyone." That afternoon, neighboring families gathered for a small beach party. The Miller couple, Jennifer and Emily, and the newly moved-in Asian fan family also participated. Sophie was nervous at first, but surrounded by friends, she naturally regained her smile. She had brought a new blue float. The pink float had been confiscated by police as evidence. "Instead of Luna, I named this one Blue," Sophie said happily, hugging her new float. With the adults watching over her, Sophie gradually got used to the water. Thanks to Emily holding her hand, she was able to laugh in the water again. "Look, Mom. I'm okay." When Sophie sat on her float and waved, tears welled up in Caitlin's eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude for her daughter's strength and the warmth of the people around them. In the evening, on their way home from the beach as a family, Sophie looked up at the sky and said, "I hope our next neighbor will be a kind person." The Stevenson house had already been sold, and new residents were scheduled to move in next month. "I'm sure they'll be wonderful people," Caitlin answered. "And we'll be good neighbors too." Mark took his wife's hand. "I learned something from this experience. True community is created by people who care for each other and support each other in times of trouble." That night, Caitlin gazed at the ocean from her bedroom window. The late summer ocean was calm, with moonlight beautifully illuminating the water surface. That terrible incident had temporarily shaken their lives, but at the same time it taught them what was truly important. It wasn't a luxurious house or perfect environment, but bonds with people who have caring hearts for each other. There were people like Stevenson, but there were also true neighbors like the Miller couple and Jennifer. What mattered was which one you focused on. Caitlin smiled as she closed the window. Tomorrow would bring another new day in this beautiful seaside town with her family. And this time, she could greet that day as a true member of the community.